We just obviously love Sense and Sensibility and love Jane Austen, as do so many people. So cool. I'm not sure that she had any idea that as she wrote her works, that her work would just continue to be enjoyed for decades and decades and decades and decades. I mean, at least 200 years at this point. So we're excited that we get to keep sharing those stories, because those are some stories that have been around.
Still so relevant. Yeah,
they've been around.
No matter how society and technology changes, still very relevant.
And can remind us of the beauties of simpler times, and maybe even help us be more appreciative of our modern conveniences and all those good things.
Those priorities, that no matter the technologies, there are still certain priorities and values that are never going to change. We never make them happen faster or easier. It's just about time and putting in the effort.
Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us once again. We are so thrilled to be back talking about very fun and fantastic films. My name is Devorah Governale.
And I'm Carrie Parker.
And today we are doing some Jane Austen love, and we are talking about Sense and Sensibility. I'm going to throw it over to Carrie, because she definitely knows this one. I have sat through dozens of rehearsals for Pride and Prejudice and for Emma, but this one's definitely a bit more her forte.
Yeah, I am a little bit of a Jane Austen nerd, and quite honestly, this one was my pick for a couple of reasons. But first and foremost, Emma Thompson.
Yes.
So, just for base of reference, and let's identify the Jane Austen miracles. Devorah said Pride and Prejudice.
Possibly one of her biggest stories.
That is one of the more popular ones, quite honestly. And the reality that we have quite a few that have become, arguably which one is better. Honestly, I did love the Keira Knightley version. I have seen modernizations. There was a Bollywood one. There was another one, though.
It's a lot like Christmas Carol. It's been made time and time again.
It's been done repeatedly. We have Sense and Sensibility that was made in 1995. First and foremost, we have Emma Thompson, plays the oldest sister, Eleanor. Emma Thompson played dual role. She also wrote the screenplay and adapted it from Jane Austen.
How cool is that?
And that's why ultimately it holds more sentimentality in my heart, because
Sense and Sensibility.
Emma Thompson over time has just become bae. Like, I absolutely adore Emma Thompson and everything that she is. 1995, Kate Winslet was 20. So she was like 19 when it was probably being filmed, maybe even 18 when it was being cast, who knows.
Just like a year or two away from starting to film with James Cameron, which is crazy.
Right, for Titanic.
Yeah.
The story is that essentially casting directors, production company told Kate Winslet she was too chubby and needed to lose weight.
I've heard that.
And that Emma Thompson just said, hard no. We're not doing that. We're not doing that to her. She is perfect the way she is. You can figure out how to make costumes for it. We are not making this girl starve herself, literally, for our approval or for this role. And genuinely 100% appreciate the fact that that has instilled Emma Thompson as, one, a woman's woman, but two, a great role model and empowering entity out there in Hollywood, which is so hard to do. But that being said, the idea of who Emma Thompson is as an actress and creator and artist within Hollywood. Hugh Laurie is a longtime friend. He's also in Sense and Sensibility, another thing that I love. Again, why Sense and Sensibility is so sentimental and endearing to me is that she met her future husband doing Sense and Sensibility.
Yes.
And we're going to get there because he plays Jane Austen's
cad.
Yes.
The cad.
The archetype of the cad. And so, again, Jane Austen often wrote about women. I mean, all of her stories are about women's experience in England at the time when women did not have rights to own property. But Jane Austen's novels were the epitome and pinnacle of that time, where the class situations dictated your comfort level in life, and therefore a lot of times the moral of the story in Jane Austen's stories is love versus comfort, or love versus money. And so in Pride and Prejudice, that's the mom's whole entire concern, is that her daughters won't lose their reputations or
Yeah.
become spinsters.
Yeah, but money obviously, I mean, even still today, obviously, it affects our lives so much.
It was very influential and it was very important. We do love the contrast and comparison of Marianne and Eleanor. Eleanor is duty and obligation and responsibility. So she is aware of why things are done a certain way and doing them that way and maintaining the peace, walking the middle path, trying to do what's right. Whereas Kate Winslet's Marianne is like, manners be damned, I'm going to call this out.
Passion should rule all the things.
Yes. She very much about passion, very much about emotion and the heart. You do have a little bit of that juxtaposition, although Eleanor is a lot of heart. She is a little bit more in the wise mind, whereas Marianne is on the emotional end of the spectrum. Not that Jane Austen was considering wise mind and DBT at all when she wrote this. We still have the youngest sister, Miss Margaret, who is a little bit more of the logical rational. It's super cute. It does kind of balance out.
So little and cute.
Yep, you've got your three bears syndrome where you've got the too cold, too hot, just right. So Eleanor kind of is the just right, while you've got Marianne who's too hot, and then Margaret who's too cold. So she's actually, the youngest is Margaret, and she's hiding in the beginning. And so we get our introduction into Mr. Edward Ferrars, which is
Important distinction.
Fanny's, right, which exactly. Plot point, that'll come back around later. He does a great job. He's very charming, but Eleanor connects with him. And they just have these great discussions, and they're hanging out a lot in this time post-grief. And I'm sure in Edward's mind, that's as he sees it, that he is getting to know his sister-in-laws, but also that he is just trying to help make this period and transition and grief a little bit easier in general. And we see that with Margaret. He's super adorable. And we see his relationship with Margaret continue. He's very empathetic, very kind, very mindful of what the girls are going through, and is considerate. And that relationship continues to bud, but as it does, Fanny gets wary that Edward might form an attachment and essentially says, yes, Fanny builds the idea that the girls are not of value or worth that would equal to her brother, and that her mother would never approve and he would get the fortune removed from him. We're sad about it. The mom's insulted, she gets it, they leave as soon as they can. Again, a great representation of what it was to be a woman, and literally how far women's equality has come. Sir John Middleton and his mother-in-law, Mrs. Jennings, takes them into the cottage. Alan Rickman plays Colonel Brandon, and so he is the neighbor. We then get an additional neighbor introduction in the form of John Willoughby, which Marianne becomes infatuated with, the very dashing Greg Weiss. It becomes a problem. We get set up with the Colonel Brandon idea, which, although Alan Rickman endearing to us in other ways to fulfill that like romantic cliche that Marianne was really holding out for and hoping for in life, right? So she sees Willoughby, she gets rescued by Willoughby in the rain after slipping and falling and twisting her ankle, gets rescued in the rain by this dashing young man on a horse. Instantaneous infatuation, and then the whole entire romantic story and tale after that. And of course, Colonel Brandon is slighted, as we would say. And we see this in Jane Austen a handful of times, but we see the more cold or reserved person versus the more open suitor. And that's same in Pride and Prejudice. You have Darcy and you have Wickham. And at one point in time, she sides with Wickham. She believes Wickham is a better person than Darcy.
Doesn't realize he's a cad.
The archetype of the Austenian cad comes out. And so we find out, just like Wickham, that Willoughby is a cad. Ultimately, two different situations, and that's kind of why, again, I do love Sense and Sensibility. Also, Sense and Sensibility has a little bit more of a Bridgerton feel for me, because they actually go to London, which historically speaking, when Jane Austen lived, that was a thing. Seasons like Bridgerton has kind of made people aware of. If someone was coming out for a season, daughters specifically, typically, it was more the, are they of age to start being suited or seeking suitors? And in Bridgerton,
travel was not quick or easy.
It wasn't quick or easy. And a lot of times you did kind of have to find someone, if you were not of money, you had to be in the good graces of someone who did have somewhere for you to stay in London for the season so that you could go to all of these galas and balls, which were social events and situations solely for the purpose of young people meeting and getting married. And then Mrs. Jennings invites them, plus her daughter's ward, Lucy Steele, out to London for the season. And so Lucy Steele ends up telling Eleanor, before they ever go to London, but on that night that they get invited, that she has actually been secretly engaged to Edward Ferrars for about 5 years.
No.
Which is, again, the secret engagement. We have that in Emma, very classically. Similarly, Eleanor is now sworn to secrecy about this secret engagement. Marianne goes out to London and finds out that Willoughby is engaged. And ultimately, she is told that he had been promised for a long time to someone else. Eleanor became exasperated by Marianne's outward affection towards Willoughby in their town before they went to London and before Willoughby left unexplained. And she said that she just wished that she would learn the way of the world. And Alan Rickman was like, I've seen what that does to a young woman who has her spark and has her love and her energy. You don't wish that. And ultimately it alludes to this story that we find out that he had fallen for a young woman. His family didn't approve. She got shunned and banished. He found out later that the young woman had an illegitimate child. He had to swear that he would take care of the child and make sure that the daughter was provided for. And so ultimately, in a scene earlier when he just inexplicably is called away, we don't know why. And at that moment in London, it is revealed that the reason he had to rush away is because that same girl, daughter of his star-crossed love, was with child, as they would say back in the day, and that it was Willoughby's. That is also a common theme. We see that in Pride and Prejudice, very similar parallel with Wickham, and specifically with Darcy's sister. That Wickham and Darcy had grown up together and all this, and now Wickham makes Darcy out to be a villain, that he just cut him off and banished him and all this, but essentially it was because Wickham had tried to convince Darcy's younger sister to run away with him.
Yeah.
And that was not how that went back in the day. It made Wickham out to be...
Everything had to be on the up and up. And everything.
It made Wickham out to be a gold digger, which was a thing. The weird reverse of in that society, since women would come with dowries and they could get inheritance in that way, but it would ultimately go to their husbands. There were men who would seek out women of fortune, knowing that they would be the ones to possess the fortune, and they didn't actually have to care for the woman whatsoever. That's where we see that theme with Marianne. So unfortunately, Kate Winslet's Marianne is completely distraught, learning about all of this, and doubts, of course, if he ever truly loved her, if she was ever truly of value to him. And Marianne's like, he didn't. He never actually said the words, I love you. It was just every single day implied through his actions, aka nonverbal communication. Again, though, this is why Austen perseveres through the centuries.
Generations and generations.
Because so many female empowerment concepts within Sense and Sensibility, the story itself, because of Jane Austen. But then when you add and multiply the fact that Emma Thompson wrote it very purposefully and made sure that these concepts were very well drawn for us and painted in Ang Lee's brushstrokes of great landscapes. I mean, literally, there's a moment where Marianne's talking about the love lost and etc. And it's literally gorgeous Kate Winslet with the backdrop of very British coast, right? The coastal cliffs. So gorgeous. All so picturesque. Like almost all of it could be paintings. Their cottage is pristine and adorable. Everything is, you wish you could be there. And that's why I also genuinely love it. So ultimately, the lesson with Willoughby ends up teaching Marianne that Colonel Brandon is not actually a loss. You know, like it's not, she's not losing anything by picking Colonel Brandon. And she sees that he is accountable, responsible, true, and genuinely adores her. And he had already before Willoughby been laying that groundwork of he was there and doting on her, very attentive. But it was the fact that she wanted it in different packaging. That's superficiality, and we acknowledge that as women, especially in fairy tales, a sense with the sensibility, acknowledging and identifying what is long-term beneficial versus immediate gratification, which of course is something that I have to try and help people identify and relate that lesson all the time. Unfortunately, some lessons, like Marianne's, have to happen the hard way, learning the hard way, as we say. And she does. She ends up in her grief and in her melodrama. She stands out in the rain. And she ends up catching a fever, which at the time, pre-modern medicine, almost kills people. But very well done, historically accurate, I think, in that way, and helping to paint the picture of what it was to be a woman in Jane Austen time period.
Yeah.
And acknowledging how to navigate was not easy. And Eleanor at one point, because finally it comes out that Edward was engaged to Lucy Steele the whole time, and Marianne goes to her and is like, what? And Eleanor's like, yeah, I knew. And she's like, how could you know and not tell me? And she was like, because I made a promise. And that is why I love Eleanor. And that's also why I was pointing at her the whole time. And I was like, that's you. That's you. That's you. After Marianne's drama, after the Lucy Steele situation, so Edward gets his fortune cut off because he was engaged to Lucy Steele and mom didn't approve. So everything went to his younger brother, Robert Ferrers. We go back to our normal life in our cottage, and now Marianne and Brandon have connected because she made it through the fever and is seeing the glory of Colonel Brandon in that life. So they're starting to connect and build that relationship. And we hear that Lucy Steele married Mr. Ferrers. The wedding happened.
Mr. Ferrers.
That is one of my favorite Austinian tropes, is the women adjusting themselves because men have arrived on the scene, because we see it in Pride and Prejudice as well. They do a very good job. And ultimately, that's what Edward showed up for, was to propose and say how he was so sorry and he has loved her the whole time. And they end up happily ever after. And we get a double wedding. We get Colonel Brandon and Marianne, Eleanor and Edward, and everybody lives happily ever after, as it should be. But in all honesty, that's why we love Jane Austen, because she doesn't pull the punches. She shows the dirty, gritty things that fairy tales didn't show. And so that's why they stand the test of time. That's what most of Jane Austen's stories are about, is which one would you pick? Love or comfort?
And in a perfect world, you get both.
In a perfect, yes, ideal world, if we can keep working towards equality and we can make these things happen, women would get to have jobs if they wanted to and not be frowned upon and not be told they should be a homemaker, that they're not doing their womanly duties.
Unless they really want that, which is also okay.
Which is also okay, but we should get the choice.
Yeah, choice is the point.
Yes. Freedom.
Freedom, as Pharrell sings. Wonderful.
Yay!
Well, thank you so much for joining us yet again for a fantastic film. We just obviously love Sense and Sensibility and love Jane Austen, as do so many people. So cool. I'm not sure that she had any idea that as she wrote her works, that her work would just continue to be enjoyed for decades and decades and decades and decades. I mean, at least 200 years at this point. So we're excited that we get to keep sharing those stories, because those are some stories that have been around.
Still so relevant. Yeah,
they've been around.
No matter how society and technology changes, still very relevant.
And can remind us of the beauties of simpler times, and maybe even help us be more appreciative of our modern conveniences and all those good things.
Those priorities, that no matter the technologies, there are still certain priorities and values that are never going to change. We never make them happen faster or easier. It's just about time and putting in the effort.
Yay. Well, we'd love to hear your comments. Is this your favorite Jane Austen? Is there another one? Which version is your favorite of the ones that have
all
been made?
The BBCs, like, let's be real, all of them.
Exactly. A lot to continue to discuss. We'd love to continue those conversations. And then in the meantime, we'll look forward to seeing you again next time. Thanks, guys. Bye.